The Zambians, other Zambians, especially those that belong to the ruling party, the UPND, see you as an extremely bitter man. Do you have any personal issues against President Hakainde Hichilema?
No, I don't. I have issues with his bad leadership. I hate that. No, I hate bad leadership, whether it's Hichilema or those who came before him. I detest bad leadership, and bad leadership for me is very easy. You know, it's corruption. You know, failure to tackle corruption, for example, is issues to do with the human rights violations, issues to do with the abuse of state institutions, issues to do with the failure to tackle the high cost of living, you know, the price of essential commodities, meal, cooking oil, transport, rent, whatever you think about, it has gone very high, higher than it was in 2021. I hate tribalism. You know, I hate particularly leaders who practice tribalism. And I also hate those who attack democracy, who create repressive laws. You know, leaders who don't do much to uplift the conditions of the poor Zambia. I hate that. Now, when you criticize leaders who fail to improve people's living conditions, who undermine institutions, who basically provide bad leadership, supporters of successive ruling parties have mistaken that for hatred of the individual leader who is in office at a given time. I remember that even under the previous president, you know, late President Edgar Lungu, PF supporters said the same thing, that I hated him. UPN supporters were very hurt with my criticism of our previous president. But it's typical that, you know, successive supporters of our ruling parties I've never really considered me their friend, and it's fine. What I think matters for me is, you know, the need to have this kind of difficult conversations. If I say this president has, you know, done a wrong thing, and I explain why I believe I've done the wrong thing, somebody else should come and challenge that opinion to say we disagree for this and that reason. I'll listen and learn. But if their response is simply to say we hate this person, you ignore that, because you see, Andrew, what matters in life is not what people say about us. It is what we know about ourselves. It is how we respond to what has been said. Many people, you know, before this president and under his administration, they say all sorts of things about Sishuwa. What is important is not, you know, what they say. It's the truth. The truth is that I have no hatred whatsoever against the president. Hatred consumes those who hold it, you know, because the people you hate don't even know that you hate them. So ultimately, how does it benefit me to hate the president? If the president keeps many of the promises that he made, for example, in 2021, I'll be one of the praise singers, because a successful Zambia is good for me as well. So if you look at the issues I raised, there's no me in those issues. If you fight corruption, if you promote democracy and abolish anti-democratic laws, if you unite the country, you know, across ethnic and regional divides, if you lower the cost of living for ordinary Zambians, for example, if you don't abuse state institutions to fix critics and opponents, I'll be very happy to join the bad wagon that are singing praises for this current president, or for any president who is going to achieve our aspiration to be a better Zambia. I just think that we Zambians, Andrew, should really take seriously the civic duty of holding our leaders to account. Even if I support the current president, I should be able to tell him when he's wrong, that, sir, you're moving in the wrong direction here, so that the success of that president is our collective success as a country. But I think we have this culture where, you know, criticizing leaders is not something that is our strength as a people. And you can't blame many Zambians who prefer having some kind of reverence to authority. When we grow up in our homes,
prior to 2021,
we don't really hold our...
Prior to 2021, nobody thought you would you'd be so strong against President Hakainde Hichilema, calling him a liar, calling him and and democratic, and all those names that you call him, Dr. Sishuwa Sishuwa. Prior to 2021, nobody would ever imagine that one day you would call President Hakainde Hichilema that. Probably maybe explain to us what changed, because you were a very strong critic of the Patriotic Front, and you seemingly or silently were promulgating some of the issues that the UPND at that time were selling to the Zambian people. At what point really did you automatically become so detached to the administration of President Hakainde Hichilema and his beliefs?
Well, it is true that I held the PF account and former President Edgar Lungu. As you remember, I was almost arrested. They reported me to the police, I think, in 2021. They said they committed sedition. They said my articles in the Mail and Guardian were undermining democratic institutions. And again, it was nothing personal against former President Edgar Lungu. And if you remember, before he died, I think it was 2023, he apologized, says, look, we were wrong. We thought you were sponsored by Hichilema when you criticized my administration. And even when I met President Lungu before he died, one of the things he mentioned was this idea that if he was in regular contact with his successor, one of the things he would tell him is that you should pay attention to critics. Not everyone wishes you ill will by criticizing you. They're actually trying to correct you, because those who are closer to you sometimes may not be so free to tell you that you are walking into a ditch. And so the former president, I think that he came to realize after he left office that not everyone who criticized him meant ill will. They meant well. And even when President Hichilema was in opposition, there were aspects that I criticized. If you go to the internet and just say Sishuwa mining and Hichilema, you'll find a couple of articles there where I raised questions about Hichilema's relationship with mining capital. I also raised concern about the lack of clarity of his vision, I think around 2018 or so. So there were moments when I held him to account as well as the incoming leader, but not as aggressive as I did with the PF, because my simple approach to political commentary, Andrew, is to hold to account leaders who are in power at a given time, who are in power at any given moment. Once those leaders leave office, my attention shifts to the next one. And that's what I did even with President Lungu. And I never started criticizing Lungu after he came to power. I gave him about 100 days, 3 months. And I did the same with President Hichilema. If you check on African Arguments, our website, my first criticism of Hichilema was in early December 2021. I was examining the first 100 days of the president's stay in power, and I pointed out what I thought were good things. I also pointed out what I thought were areas of concern, and those areas of concern were meant to tilt him back into line, to simply say, okay, here are the good things that you are doing. Here are the bad things that are concerning. Can you come back onto the good things? Can you focus more on doing the good things? Because we disliked Edgar Lungu, for example, for his tribalism. If you remember under the PF, Tongans, for example, were discriminated against, particularly the civil service, but in the general public life as well. And I was one of those people who criticized Lungu and the PF for their tribalism against our brothers and sisters from Southern Province, publicly so. And what I had hoped was that President Hichilema would come in and ensure adequate ethnic representation in government. What we have seen is a different scenario where the Tongas and the Lozis, for example, are now the dominant groups in terms of representation in public service appointments. I don't like that. I want a Zambia where everybody, regardless of their ethnic or regional origins, feels that all opportunities in public service are available to them. We can discuss this in detail. But the PF were also very corrupt, Andrew. We saw reports of the Financial Intelligence Center showing billions of dollars that we are losing annually. We never saw President Lungu or the PF taking that issue seriously or arresting anybody for that. And I felt that President Hichilema would do a better job. So I voted for him in 2021 on the understanding that if similar things or similar wrongs were to happen under his administration, people will be held accountable because corruption robs the country of the vital resources that we need for investment in social services. And what you have seen after President Hichilema came to power is the FIC is still generating these reports. They are telling us, for example, that $3.5 billion is lost in financial illicit flows annually. Now, it doesn't make sense that no one is able to account for this because we are going with begging balls to the IMF or the Western countries. Can you give us a loan, for example, to repair our economy, 1.2, 1.8 billion? What about if we actually seal the loopholes of corruption so that the money that we lose to corruption can be invested in sectors without going to get more debt, for example? I mean, when I criticize this thing, that's not a hatred. That's a citizen holding the leaders to account. The democracy aspect, if you remember, the PF were very undemocratic. They undermined the human rights of many people. They even enacted impressive legislation, such as the Cybersecurity and Cyber Crimes Act. That just before they left office in 2021. I still remember President Hichilema committing to repeal that legislation. What did he do when he came to power? He actually recreated into a more repressive statute. Again, we don't want that because we Zambians love our democracy, and I think that our leaders should really help us to achieve our aspirations.
How true, Dr. Sishuwa Sishuwa, that the reason for why you come out so strong against the UPND is because you wanted a job from President Hakainde Hichilema, which he didn't give you?
Well, it's not true. You see, I'm an academic, Andrew, and researcher at heart, and I enjoy the free thinking, which I can't do in government. My education, Andrew, has been such that I'm not short of job offers from many quarters, including international organizations and foreign governments. Accepting a job, for me, would be an act of charity on my part. I've never been happy with my job, for example, and finances, even now. In short, I'm not looking for a job in the government. No, they wouldn't pay me enough even if I were to join the government today.
Would you accept an appointment?
The salaries of, let me finish this point. The salaries, for example, of lecturers at Stellenbosch University are published on the website of the institution. If you check that, you find that somebody at my level gets more than what the president of Zambia gets today. And I'm not saying this to boast. I'm saying, if I were to get into government, what do I be looking for? At best, I'll be there for 5 years, for example, before the person loses. I'm young. You see, I have a whole career ahead of me to thrive, to grow. I get into politics, into government today. That government loses power tomorrow. I've messed up my career. So what would I be looking for that I can get outside it? A critical issue, Andrew, is that when people criticize or hold governments, we shouldn't focus on their person. We should focus on what they are saying. If there's substance in what they are saying, let's pay attention and act on that. If there's no substance in what they are saying, you ignore them. The issues I raise are not meant for my benefit as a citizen, an individual. They are meant for the benefit of the country. Even if I kept quiet today, I won't suffer because I live a simple and very quiet life. I have everything I need. The critical issue for me is that this culture of attacking the person, rather than the argument that they are saying, actually impoverishes feedback on the performance of our leaders, because ultimately, if I point out President Hichilema and say, listen, this route you have taken will lead you to ruin, and he changes course, who benefits? It's him. I wouldn't want him to fail, because if he fails, it's Zambia that fails. And we should stop this culture of ensuring that we simply chuck out leaders. No, we kicked out Edgar Lungu because he didn't listen. And we are kicking out Hichilema, as far as I'm concerned, this year because he hasn't listened. What we need to do is to pay attention to the content of criticism, to say what this person is saying, whether it's anti-corruption, whether it's national unity, whether it's attacks on democracy, whether it's issues of mining, whether it's the the issue of cost of living. Can we pay attention to those content-based discussion and move forward?
If there's one point President Hakainde Hichilema would agree with you on that he's consistently been mentioning at almost every point he gets a chance to, is the fact that he believes so much that the PF, just like you, were undemocratic, were corrupt. They ran down the economy, of this country. In fact, he even argues, President Hakainde Hichilema even poses the question that these people that want to come back and run the country, what exactly are they coming to do? Because they left the country and the economy, in shambles. But looking at the race of 14 presidential candidates, one today announced that he was going to support the UPND Akim Njovu. That means that now he is withdrawn. That means that we have 13. If you agree that we can't bring back the PF again, like President Hakainde Hichilema argues, you also believe that President Hakainde Hichilema must be voted out of office, in the next 46 days. Then who can run this country, Dr. Sishuwa?
Well, the good thing about democracy is that it gives us a choice to choose other leaders if leaders in office fail. If you remember in 2021, there were people who said President Hichilema will be worse than President Lungu, so we shouldn't vote President Lungu out. Because the fear was that those in opposition would be much worse. I rejected those sentiments myself because the good thing about our political system is that you give a chance to leaders. If 5 years they have disappointed you at the end of it, you vote them out and give somebody an opportunity to govern. I've seen sentiments to the effect that the PF are in charge and therefore they shouldn't be brought back. That's very simplistic. Let's get into that argument a little bit and then pack it more. If you think about it, when President Hichilema talks about the PF, who exactly is the PF? Robert Chavinga, who according to the government is the leader of the PF, is in an alliance with the UPND. Miles Sampa, who is another leader of the PF, is with the same UPND. And so the person that they are saying this is PF maybe is Mundubile but he leads a different political formation now, and Makebi. Now, Mundubile and Makebi were both provincial ministers under the PF. Those are very far from the central decision making in terms of cabinet. To state this point is not to defend them or to say they are the best people to lead, suitable people to lead Zambia. It is to downplay the significance that the UPND attach to the identities of these people and their former, participation in government. Think about the Americans. You have two political parties there, the Democrats and the Republicans. The government changes after maybe 4 years, at most every 8 years. No one says you Democrats or you Republicans were in office before, 4 years ago, 8 years ago, therefore we don't want you. There's a recognition that people are different. The kind of decisions you make when you are a government, when you are a president, are very different from the kind of decisions you make when you are a minister, especially at provincial level, for example. So rather than downplaying the ticket to Mundubile and Makebi on the basis that we're part of the PF, I think what Zambians should do, and what the UPND should encourage them to do, is to examine what I would call the two VVs. One is the vision, the manifesto that they are promising. You can ask Mundubile to say, how are you going to achieve A, B, C, D, for example, that you are promising? The other V is the issue of values, but that speaks to the idea of character. We have not really examined the idea of character in electoral context in Zambia, the importance of character. Mundubile was part of the PF, for example, that enacted that repressive cyber security and cyber crimes law. I remember that he was the Northern Province Minister. At one time, he was chief whip, the government chief whip. He was leader of the opposition at one time, but even before they lost power, he was part of that government entity. Now, you may say, yes, he was part of the provincial structure, but what was his attitude toward this kind of repressive legislation that the PF created? What was his attitude towards corruption that took place under the PF, and particularly under Edgar Lungu? What was his attitude towards tribalism? And because if you are a leader in government and you are unhappy with something, you can walk away and resign in defense of principle. We have leaders, Andrew, who did this. Simon Zukas, I remember in 1996, and Deepak Patel, both of them were cabinet ministers. When Chiluba created a constitutional amendment that excluded former President Kaunda from participating in that year's elections, They said, we don't agree with this constitutional amendment, and they resigned at a matter of principle. Levi Mwanawasa resigned in protests against corruption of the Chiluba government. Ludwig Sondashi, Akashambra Biferawanika, Katongo Maine, Chiluka Kapwepo, you name them. There's so many leaders from the past who walked away. So you can hold Mundugire to account to say, can you tell us what you do different from what Eddie Galong, for example, did? This tendency of trying to say you're just part of the PF, that won't work, because you see the PF, some of the PF people are in government, in the government of President Ichirema. Felix Mutato was a senior government official under the PF. You can't say those people who are joining the UPND are clean and good. The only bad ones are those who are in the US party. I think that's very unhelpful. So out of those 13 people who have remained, what Zambians should do is to examine the visions of all these people and the character of the leaders, the presidential candidates, to say, do they present the best vision for taking Zambia forward, for example? When it comes to President Hichilema, the record over the past 5 years should be weighed against the promises that he made when he was in opposition. How far has he gone in achieving those promises that were made 5 years ago? If he has achieved most of the promises, then Zambians should vote for him, because why would you vote out a bad leader, rather a good leader? If he has failed to achieve the major promises he made, and in my assessment he has failed, and we can talk about this in detail subsequently, then it means we should give a chance to somebody else. We should look at those other 12 leaders who are remaining. Fred Membe, for example. Let's look at the manifesto of Fred Membe. If you actually look at the key manifestos, you can see that there are very little differences here and there, but it's actually the character of these leaders which distinguishes them. What is the character of Fred? Examine that and say, if it's good, let's vote for Fred Membe. If it's Hari Kalava, again, you examine the vision that Citizens First is promising to implement once in government. But in addition to that political program, you have to examine the character of Kalava itself and say, is this a leader that we can trust, for example? Because trust is an important principle in public service. You go to other leaders, for example, I don't know many of them, you may have to remind me. For me, actually, I would think that I would have wished that many of these opposition leaders just support their colleagues, because the key people here is Kalava, Fred Membe, Brian Mundevile, and President Hichilema. If we had, a contest, it would really revolve around these four, and it is their manifesto and their character that voters should examine. It's not for me to tell a Zambian to say, go and vote for this leader or that leader. I don't have that arrogance. What I can share with you is the idea that Zambia will thrive if we voters take seriously and carefully scrutinize what these people are promising us, but also carefully scrutinize their characters.
You're of the considered view that President Hakainde Hichilema has failed to deliver on his promises. The official communication is that President Hakainde Hichilema has delivered on more than 90% of the things that he promised. What are you holding President Hakainde Hichilema on to account when he says he's failed to deliver on what he promised?
I think the major issues for me, let's start with what he has done. He has done well. I think the implementation of the free education policy is a commendable policy that for which he deserves credit. I hear some people talking about the quality of the education that is being implemented, but that's a different thing altogether. The first step is to acknowledge that there's free education. It may not have everything that we needed to be in terms of the quality and the elements. That's something we can improve upon, but I think it's commendable that the President and his administration have implemented free education, because many of our young people are benefiting from that. I would hope that it can be extended further to higher education, to the higher education sector. But also even there, they have reintroduced the loans that the PF had withdrawn. I was very critical when Kandlo and our friends in the PF withdrew that, because I'm a product of that facility. And I got a loan from the government. I got educated at the University of Zambia out of that loan. So it was very commendable that the government reintroduced the loans for the University of Zambia, but then extended it to other public universities. I think that's one thing. The other thing, of course, why they've done very well is in relation to employment, particularly in the health and education sectors. We have seen teachers being employed, we have seen nurses being employed. The PF had done very well in relation to building schools, for example, but many of these schools were not staffed adequately with the teachers. And I think that what the UPND has done very well is to employ people to make sure that these schools have teachers. And if you're implementing free education, it only makes sense that you should be able to employ more teachers to teach these children. So that's one area where they've done very well. They're also employed within the security services. I know people like saying, but these are perfectly normal government jobs. But they still matter because governments are voted into office to create jobs. So there, I'll give credit to President Hichilema. There is a contest around the CDF. We see the idea that more money has been raised through CDF to empower people at the local level to make decisions that affect them in relation to their priorities. The Minister of Local Government is still very much the driver of some of these things. So there's room for improvement there. But the idea of devolving power to local authorities is in itself a good thing. And then there is the issue of debt restructuring that they have highlighted. It's a low-hanging fruit. In my view, anyone who would have won the 2021 election would have done that. The PF did not fail to do debt restructuring. The PF were simply scared that if they implemented some of the conditions that the IMF were demanding, which would have raised the cost of commodities, particularly fuel and other aspects, they would have lost the election. So they postponed the key decision-making there after the election in the hope that they would win that election. They lost it. And I think that Hichilema came in and then he implemented the debt restructuring, but it's not really an achievement for me. The key issue is, what are we doing to avoid the kind of debt trap that we found ourselves under the PF example? And that's where I come in now to the key issues in terms of the major promises why I consider Hichilema to have been a failure. The first is in relation to the way they have handled the mining sector. They have reduced the state participation in the mining sector. We used to have shares in mining that are owned by First Quantum. It wasn't a lot of it, but at least it was sufficient to give us revenue whenever mines were making profits, for example. What did we see? The 20%, for example, in Kansashi that ZCC Investment Holdings had was converted into a simple paltry, one-off payment on a regular basis. That's not very, very good. What the state should have done is to increase its uptake in the mining industry so that the revenue from the mining sector is increased as well for investment in social sectors. And then you have the tax holiday that they give to their friends in the mining sector. Some of these mining companies like First Quantum, you see in the Guardian produced evidence showing that they backed Hichilema. And what you have seen in power is that they have gone into bed with the government, with our elites in power, and they have benefited in terms of tax holidays, for example. We don't want that because we elected President Hichilema to make sure that we derive maximum benefits from the jewel of our economy, which is mining. We just don't want holes remaining in Northwestern Province. We don't want holes remaining in the Gold Belt, for example. We want revenue that can be reinvested in the lives of our people. And then, of course, you have these small things like the gold scandal that you saw at the airport, the minerals in Wapula, that have not been done very well in the mining sector.
Maybe clarity. So that's one. Yeah, but maybe just clarity. As you continue highlighting, you say that First Quantum backed President Hakainde Hichilema in the last election, and as a result, you mentioned something that I didn't get. But also, how do we substantiate, these claims, Dr. Sishuwa Sishuwa, that this company I'm mentioning offered financial support to the president?
It's not me who is saying that. The UK Guardian newspaper, anybody can read the UK Guardian, and they detail how Hichilema received support from the UK Guardian. He never disputed that. Neither First Quantum disputed that. So it's a matter of record. It's not Sishuwa who is making this assertion, for example. But also, if you see how the government has treated this kind of mining investors, for example, the relationship, a close relationship between mining capital and Hichilema as I said, is an issue that I raised even in the when he was in opposition. The PF were terrible, but when Margaret Bonakato was Minister of Finance, I remember this, they increased taxes in the mining sector. Hichilema made a startling statement saying, no, mining companies were telling him that they couldn't wait for him to come to power because they will pay fair taxes. You see, Andrew, there are certain areas where we should put together the country, regardless of whether one is in opposition or in government. If the UPND is implementing very, very good taxes in the mining industry, for example, we all benefit. And there's no need for anyone in the opposition to fight them. So when Lungu and his friends in the PF implemented significant increases in the mining industry, everybody should have supported that move, but it was a good thing. Hichilema did it. And then you have the same person come to power. You see the kind of policies he's implementing in the mining sector. If you read Musokutane's budgets, annual budget, for example, you see the kind of losses we are making every time in the mining sector. Why should we do that? That's our jewel. We should get the maximum benefit from it. The other point, I think, is where he has failed is anti-corruption. The PF, as I said, were corrupt. You can't fight corruption without a couple of things. One is leadership, or in terms of example. You know, you have a president who is failing to publish his assets. 5 years has gone without him publishing his assets. These are the same asset declarations that he made to the Electoral Commission of Zambia. Yes, there is no law, because the PF changed this amendment in 2016. There's no law that says you should publish that. But HH was elected on a ticket of transparency and accountability. So as an example, in terms of leadership, you are able to step forward and say, even though there is no legal requirement for me to declare my assets, I'm making them public so that you can know which company, the companies in which I have an interest, so that if those companies bid for government contracts, you are able to see that, you know, that and that company is receiving favorable treatment because it belongs to the president. Or we are able to check if they are paying appropriate taxes, for example. Right now, we don't know those companies, and we don't know if they are receiving favorable treatment because the president has refused to publish his assets. What is so difficult about getting the same record that you give the ECZ to say, in the name of transparency, and as an example to my subordinates, I'm publishing this information as a commitment to transparency. HH actually told us when he was campaigning in 2021 that under his administration, it's not just the president who published their assets on an annual basis. Even ministers would do the same. After he comes to power, he reneges on those commitments. That's wrong, and that's where, for me, he has failed, because he has failed to lead the anti-corruption fight by example. And then the second one is in terms of legislation. If you look at the Anti-Corruption Act, for example, it provides a scenario where the president appoints both the board as well as the executive leadership of the Anti-Corruption Commission. I expected the president would correct this so that the board appoints, rather the board A reports to Parliament, and secondly, it's appointed by Parliament. And that way you don't have a scenario where both the board and the executive leadership report to the same appointing authority. But what have we done? We have not seen, what have we seen? We have not seen any commitment to changing the anti-corruption law, to strengthen it, so that you can have a scenario where the board can hold the people in executive leadership to account. And of course, we have seen changes in terms of the law about cattle theft, for example, is non-bailable. Zambians are generally poor. Not many of them own cattle. The thieves that steal government resources are in government. They steal drugs, for example, the Ministry of Health. They steal so many things, including money. So what we want to do is to strengthen sanctions. You can make corruption even non-bailable offense so that you instill fear in the would-be thieves. Has that happened? No. Again, I'm saying the president has been a big disappointment in the fight against corruption. There are so many examples one can cite that show that there hasn't been that genuine political will to fight corruption. Yeah. Then the third one is national unity. If you remember again under Edgar Lungu, as I said, you see, there was a lot of dominance of Bembas and Easterners in government positions. We told Edgar Lungu this. We said, listen, we don't want a Zambia where you have two regions so dominant in government appointments. The Tongas, for example, were discriminated against. Yes, the laws were also discriminated against, for example, but I think the worst affected were Tongas because they were almost like second-class citizens. Many people felt that Ichirema was not going to win because he needed the support of members and Easterners. What did we see? When Zambia is under threat, for example, what Zambians have shown is the capacity to break ranks and save the country. So what we saw was members and Easterners coming together to support Ichirema. Without the support of these constituencies, for example, as well as the urban areas of Lusaka and Kwadro, Ichirema would have become president. So what we expected was that he wouldn't create a reversal of that. And what have we seen? We have seen a scenario where, if you look at the police sector, for example, police service example, it's mainly led by people from one half of the country. The provincial leadership of the police, just check the police provincial commanding officers, or nearly all of them come from the three provinces where the UPND is very popular: Western, Southern, and Northwestern provinces, for example. The same thing with the other security sector in terms of the head of the intelligence, the head of the army, the head of the electoral commission, and other key state institutions. We don't want that. We didn't remove Edgar and his friends and their tribalism so that HH could come and implement his tribalism, which favors Roses and Tongas. My fear, Andrew, is that if Mundugiri and his friends win power tomorrow, we might see simply a reversal of what's happening now, where Bembas and Easterners again become the dominant thing. So what I would have expected HH to do is two things. One is to be sensitive to the idea of ethnic balancing, because there are many people who saw him as a tribalist even before he was given a chance to govern. So you don't want to prove those people right. What you do is to be sensitive to that criticism, especially in your first term. You can't have a scenario where Obama is given a chance to govern, and then he packs his government with African Americans and other ethnic minorities. People would say, okay, when we gave this guy a chance, what did we see? We saw him bringing people from their ethnic group, for example. And they don't like that because you are damaging the future presidential ambitions of kids from that region. Because the people from other side would say, when we gave you a chance to govern, you promoted your own. So what I would have expected HH to do is to create laws. The Constitution is very broad as it is, already says there should be ethnic balancing, regional diversity in public appointments. What he could have done is to even have more subsidiary legislation that would criminalize, not criticizing tribalism. What would criminalize? What should be criminalized in a scenario where you have a Bemba as the person at the top, and another Bemba beneath them, where you make sure that diversity, not just a slogan, is something that can believe. We should be sensitive to the need for diversity in terms of ethnic and regional representation. The same way we are sensitive to the issue of gender. It's very easy to see that there's no woman there, for example, because you can see the gender.
The feeling.
We retain the same awareness towards the issues of tribalism. So there are some of the areas where HH has failed. And I don't understand how anyone who believes that HH has failed on these accounts can be able to say, let's vote him back. We can talk about the cost of living as well, because it's huge. I mentioned already this. So if a leader has failed on all these major issues, why the hell should they be brought back to office?
Many say this issue of tribalism is just mere perception, but for so many years, Zambians have not known tribalism. They obviously don't even care who the commanding officer for what province is, because they don't see tribe in them. They see a Zambian, in that very person. And majorly, the argument is that the issue of tribalism is just among you, the elite, that are very sensitive to these issues of tribalism. But in all essence, it doesn't even exist, Dr. Sishuwa, because Zambians don't see people in that light. And we're blowing this issue of tribalism out of context, really, because I feel Zambians don't really mind who is there. What they mind is, are they Zambians?
That's the argument that actually people in the PF made whenever we pointed out that Tongas were discriminated against under the PF. They told us that what matters is merit. It was almost as if to say merit is only found among members and Easterners, for example. They were very dismissive of this concern. What is important, Andrew, is for us to have an open conversation on this issue of tribalism. It's not true to say that it exists. It does. And Kaunda and his friends actually recognize it as early as the 1967. If you remember the Unity Congress that took place then, resulted in very, very serious ethnic divisions, for example. But he implemented ethnic balancing in public appointments as a way of building national unity. The idea of one Zambia, one nation wasn't just a slogan to be repeated before the ZNBC made 19 hours main news. It was a lived experience. If you came from Ruapula, you went to work in Western Province. If you came from Southern Province, you went to work in another province where you felt at home. The key issue is that I'm an expert on ethnic politics because my PhD was actually on this, and so I believe I'm a little bit qualified to talk about this subject. Before independence in 1964, Andrew, Zambia had 4, maybe 7 major groups, for example, Bembas, Chewas, Lozis, Tongas, and the 3 groups in the Northwestern Province. Those were creations to a large extent of the colonial enterprise and missionary activities, because after Zambia was colonized, initially by missionaries, for example, who came and started preaching the gospel in Wapula, in northern, they found it difficult that there was no language in the north that they could use to promote the gospel across the diversity of that region. So they deliberately picked Bemba and began to promote it as a language of religious instruction. That's why we found that the Bible was translated into Bemba. That meant that the Ruapula, today's Ruapula, Northern Muchinga province, for example, began to use Bemba in religious schools, for example. Even when you had the other languages in Ruapula, you had other languages in Muchinga, like Chibisa, for example. They did the same in the East. That's how Chewa becomes a dominant language. The Parish Evangelical Mission Society did the same in Western Province. That's how Lozi becomes a dominant language. Even when actually the Lozi, as an ethnic group itself, there are very few compared to the small but numerically superior groups like the Bunda, the Subias, and others. In the Northern Province, for example, Bembas are just concentrated in Kasama, in Luingu, in Porokoso, and Chensali. But you have the Mambwe, you have the Lungus, and the other people. In Norwapula, you don't even have Bembas, you have the Lundas. The key point is that as a result of these missionary activities, these languages emerge not just as ethnic identities, but as language group identities. When the colonial administration increased to have the BSA company now getting people to go and work on the mines, the people who went to work on the mines were coming from Ruapula, present-day Ruapula, Muchinga, and Northern. When they arrived in the Kua Belt, they found that the common language they could speak, because of that religious instruction, was Bemba. And that's why you have Bemba as the leading language in the Kua Belt, because people who came to work on the Kua Belt were coming from the northern region. Lozis mainly went to work in South Africa on the land via Katima and Zimbabwe. The Tongas were producing food, so they remained in Southern Province. That's why the railway line was constructed from Kua Belt to go all the way to Southern Province. Hardly many of them went to work on the mines. The Easterners came to work in Lusaka in the service in key areas like the police, security services, as well as the domestic industry. That's why you have Nyanja, which is the variant of Chewa, very dominant in Lusaka. So at the time of independence, you have those groups because even in newspapers like Mutende, you name them, and the colonial education system, when the British took over in 1924, they simply promoted this language. So at independence, a Zambian was both a member of one particular ethnic group, but also a member of the broader language group, for example. So when we say you are a Bemba today, we are not just referring to someone from Chinsari, Mporokoso, Kasama, and Luengu. We are referring to actually somebody from the entire northern bloc, Muchinga and Ruapula, even when they are not Bemba. The same with Lozis, you see. Mbundas are referred to as Lozis today. Why? Because they come from Western Province, for example. Now, what politicians learned after 1964 was that to appeal, to get support in these areas, they needed to exploit ethnic support. So you have parties like the one from Mundiana in the Western Province appealing to the Lozis on account of ethnic support. Kapepe went to the Bembas and did the same when he fell out with Kaunda and formed the UPP. But Kaunda declared a one-party state, so the ethnic politics didn't find expression until when we returned to multi-party politics. Particularly after 1992, after 2001, because the first decade of MMD rule, the MMD was dominant. But after 2001, what you saw was ethnic politics coming back to the fore. Part of the problem was Mwanawasa embarked on an anti-corruption campaign, like Ichilema has done. But if you look at the people that were under investigation and under levy, it was mainly members from the northern and Luapula, for example, member speakers. Now, the problem was that Chiluba had appointed so many members to key government positions. So when Mwanawasa embarked on an anti-corruption campaign, the people who were found wanting were mainly members because they are the ones who had the opportunity to steal. And it looked as if he was targeting members when it wasn't, when the problem was created by people who came before him. You can see a little bit of that in what HH is encountering now. And I can tell you that even when they come to power tomorrow and he wins, and you say, let's fight corruption over the past 5 years, for example, majority of the people who will be in court facing prosecution are Tongan and Moses Ward. They are the ones that Ichilema is appointing at key government positions, and they are the ones who have the opportunities to steal, because we don't fight corruption in real time. We always wait until the government is out. So Mwanawasa embarks on that anti-corruption campaign, but the consequence is that because the people who are facing prosecution, Xavier Chungu, Frederick Chiluba, Faustin Kabwe, you name them, if you look at the top 20, only one came from the east, which was Arthur Yoel. There wasn't anyone from the other provinces, for example. So it looked like it was a campaign against member speakers. Michael Sata's PF actually rides on account of that sentiment to say we members are being discriminated against. And of course, Levy was clumsy because when he was told to say, hey, this anti-corruption thing has an ethnic character to it, he said, if you don't support me, my anti-corruption campaign, you are stinking and dirty. Sata sees those remarks and says, have you heard Mwanawasa? He said, we members are stinking and dirty. That's how the PF rides in the north, because the north voted Mwanawasa in 2001. By 5 years later, he had lost it. And then you have the people saying there's member tribalism. There's a genuine sentiment. When people feel marginalized in terms of key positions, you can't blame them if they support a particular organization, because if you look at Levy's cabinet, members again were missing in key positions. So you can't blame them when they move to PF. The same thing with Tonga tribalism. We shouldn't just condemn tribalism. We should look at what is driving that tribalism. Since the UPND was formed in 1998, for example, no political party, no presidential candidate has won Southern Province. The only time that you are going to find Tongas voting for another party was before the UPND was formed in 1998. Since then, they have always stuck the UPND. Of course, people can say, initially, before HH even came to power, what was driving that tribalism was the fact that you didn't understand their grievances. The ethnic grievances were, so we are underrepresented in government. We don't see ourselves represented there. And if I don't see myself represented in a government structure, I'll support a leader who comes from my community in the hope that maybe the reason why I'm poor is because I don't have adequate representation in government from my own community. But of course, you also have to understand that the Tongas are agriculturalists. You can't give a bag, one bag of fertilizer to a Tonga and the same bag to say a Lozi, because the dynamics are different. So you want to understand the drivers and say, can we attend to that? Even Edgar, we told Edgar that this Tonga tribalism is not a problem. The problem is what is driving it. What are their grievances? Go to them and understand them. That's just like the Tonga tribalism wasn't a problem. So you can't tell me that if lack of adequate representation in government is not a problem. It is, and people feel aggrieved about these things. The solution is not to shut them up, is to hear them, to hear their cry, to say, how can we serve you better? And if you do that, we are going to have a united Zambia.
With 46 days to go before the pause, earlier on today, President Hakainde Hichilema was right here in Lusaka, in the capital city. He was just outside the Hero Stadium. The pictures in the background here show a mega rally. Thousands and thousands of people turned up to show support to President Hakainde Hichilema. Earlier on, the past few weeks, we've seen NRPUP President Brian Mundubile with his running mate Makebi Zulu move, around Eastern Province, touched a bit of the Copper Belt, as well as Central Province. Also, he had a crowd or a mega rally as well. But what we saw today was something never seen so far, on the political space in terms of mega rallies. Doesn't that then distort your political thought that the people are no longer in love with President Hakainde Hichilema? Look at the pictures in the background here. Director, if you can show us the pictures of what happened earlier today.
Well, first of all, I want to commend the UPND for holding their rally successfully. It is as it should be. All political actors, players should really have the freedom to hold rights, because that's part of our democracy. We fought for these rights. One of the things that we don't give credit enough to is the men and women who fought for the return of multiple democracy in 1991. Akashamba Dambikstare Wanika, Derek Chitala, Frederick Chilua, Fred Membe, Mona Ndulo, you name them, Minister Wakwi, they deserve credit. We fought for a multiple democracy. And I feel aggrieved about some of the things that happened over the last 5 years, where we didn't see the opposition being given a chance to assemble, criticize the right peaceful assembly, for example. Each of them suffered about these things, for example, in the opposition. So it was very sad on my part to see that the very thing that he condemned in the opposition, he did them when he was in government, which was to shut the opposition, prevent them from exercising the right public assembly. So when I saw him doing today, obviously should have been free to everybody, I was very happy but also sad, because HM has been campaigning since the last election. He has been having rallies across the country under the guise that is the government activities, while blocking his opponent from doing the same. Part of the reason why you are seeing this big rise by Mundubile, because whether it's in Kitwe, whether it's in Kawe, whether it's in the Eastern Province now, as we are seeing, is because it's like this pent-up frustration, because they are being blocked from having rights. So people come out now and feel like, oh, this is the only chance that we can actually come out to show the leaders, support for leaders we associate with, for example. In my view, the UPND shot themselves in the foot by blocking the opposition from meeting. Because if you allowed people like Mondovi and their friends to assemble over the last 5 years, they would have said many things that would have really put off people to say, this is what you are saying. We don't want you. We would rather speak with each other. But by blocking them from meeting, you created this condition where people now feel like because you stifled on our freedoms, we would rather go with this person. All that Munduvira had to do nowadays, for example, just to stand up and people would say, yeah, this is the one, even before they listen to him. And for the UPND rally today, I was very surprised at the extent to which they went to conduct it. One, because until today, the UPND told us that crowds don't matter. When Munduvira was pulling big crowds, for example, in Kabwe, in Kitwe, in Eastern Province, the response from the UPND was to say crowds don't matter. In fact, at first they said, oh, it's AI. Then they said the crowds don't matter. Then they said, oh, after all, it's just about songs. You see, there's no content in these songs. So what does the UPND do? They go out of their way to basically get the entire music industry and turn it into a tool for one person after studying to perform. Why are you doing these things if crowds don't matter? You are going out of your way to get people from Chongwe, from Rufunsa. I was talking to two friends before I came on to this program this evening, who were saying, they saw buses of people coming from Chongwe, from Rufunsa, from Kafue, coming to Lusaka to attend that rally, for example. You don't need to do that if you are a popular party, because Lusaka alone, in fact, not even Lusaka alone, Mandevu alone, the people in Mandevu are enough to fill the entire Heroes Stadium. I think that's 60,000. When I looked at the crowd, for example, I don't think those people outside the stadium were 60,000 people. So it would have been lower if, for example, they didn't bring people from outside. And the president should be worried, because sometimes when you're in that position, it's very easy to be misled by people around you to say, sir, you are still popular, even when you are not. Because if you are busing people from outside Lusaka to come and attend your rally and create an image that, there are so many people who love you, Your Excellency, you are basically cheating yourself. The people who came today, you could argue, didn't come because the UPND's message is appealing. They came because it was almost like a free concert. They rounded together all the musicians, paid them money and say, come and perform. Even me, if I hear that your Maps is performing for free, when I previously would have paid 10,000 or whatever to go and see him perform, I'll go there and watch. But I'm not going there for the UPND. I'm going there for a concert. It was almost as if this was a musical concert where Hichilema was invited as the guest of honor, rather than a UPND rally, because there was no need to go get these influencers You pay them money, and that's why I need to appeal to the president here if he's watching. Don't pay people to endorse you, Mr. President. You are cheating yourself, because those people you are paying, they live in poor communities. Those people who follow them on social media, for example, they go to bed without food. Then you have somebody who comes and says, I'm endorsing President Ichilema after I've been paid, and I invite you to vote for this person. Do you genuinely think that a person who follows Mutale, for example, is going to vote for Ichilema on account of what Mutale says on the Facebook page? She'll get the money. It's good money. Your map will get the money. It's good money. But they will go back to their slums or to their suburbs, or whatever it is where they are living, and say, no, I'm not going to vote for this, but that money didn't come to me. In fact, they regard it as an insult that you are paying people when what you could have done is to use that money to improve their conditions of service, the condition of service for those people. The best people to bribe are not influencers, are not musicians, for example. The best people to bribe are ordinary Zambians. And the best way of bribing them is implementing policies that uplift their lives. You won't need to do what the president is doing now, where you target media with all this kind of adverts, paid for adverts, you buy newspaper headlines, for example. Because if you look at people who are going to Mundoviles rallies, they are not busted there, for example. They are not paid to attend these rallies. They walk. Some of them walk greater distances. That's what should happen if people have a natural affection towards you. But if you begin to do what the UPN is doing now, you are misleading the president into thinking that he is popular. If he goes to Eastern Province or Northern Province, don't bus people from different districts to come and attend the rallies to raise the number so that you can say the president is popular as Mundoviles rallies, for example. No. What should you speak now with the record in office? Free education, I said, well, a good thing. If people believe that the president has done a good job, they will come to these rallies without being paid. So those rallies, in my view, yes, they are important because they show leaders appeal. But what downplays them, in the case of the European rally we saw in Lusaka today, are the dynamics around it. The fact that so many people were burst out and Lusaka to attend them, the fact that they got nearly every musician paid them, say, come and perform. People are coming there because of the European message, and because they're coming for the music, one might argue. You don't need to do all those things, Mr. President, because if you have a positive record, over the last 5 years, people will come to your eyes. So I hope that what you saw in Lusaka going forward won't repeat itself. When you go to the call about Mr. President, make sure that you resist the temptation to bust people from different districts to come and attend your rallies, because those people will be doing so. They will be misleading you and digging your political grave.
Which the UPND said that all of those that came are just from within Lusaka, but you mentioned that you spoke to some people that came from different parts to listen to the message. But as we close, the program this evening, the UPND have a target to win these elections by 5 million voters. We currently have 7.8 registered, million voters registered in our register. Do you see these elections going the UPND way?
I don't. Quite frankly, I can see that Southern Province will definitely vote for the UPND. They have been voting for the UPND, as I said, since 1998. And I think part of that is ethnic. When you listen to President Ichilema, when he's in Choma, some of the stuff he says, it's very, very divisive. He says, if you don't vote for me, you people, when you go to Lusaka, they'll be beating you because at the city when you arrive, they beat you if they know you are Tonga. That's very, very bad. That's the tribalism I'm talking about, which we don't want. Because a person in Dudu who has never been to Lusaka hears the president say, people in Lusaka, and by people here, the reference is Bembas and Easterners, for example, they beat Tongas when they arrive from Choma or from Southern Province. That person thinks, oh, this is true, so I should vote for this person so that I can avoid being beaten. Should I ever go to Lusaka, for example? That's not true. It's a kind of tribalism that we saw under Michael Sata. It's a kind of tribalism that we saw under Edgar Lungu, for example. We don't want this kind of tribalism. Please unite us. This is my appeal to our leaders. Don't divide the people. The tribalism that you have seen under the UPND over the last 5 years, for me, is a red flag that should make every Zambian get concerned. And because of that factor, the kind of support that HH received in Eastern Province, in the Bemba-speaking constituencies, for example, is not going to be replicated in this year's election. But members have tested him now. You see, I hear people, you hosted the Laura Meet, I think, on this show some time back, whether it was last week or the week before, and she made a point that the problem for HH is lack of communication. She blamed Hamasaka, Max Simue, this spokesperson for the government and the governing party. I think Hamasaka and Simue have many failings, but please spare them from blame. The problem HH faces is not lack of effective communication. It's lack of credibility, because 5 years ago, he made promises. Many people believed him. I was one of those who voted for him. Bishop Mpundu was one of those who believed in him and voted for him. There are many, many people who trust that HH is going to implement what he was promising. For example, whether it's relation to the rule of law, whether it's relation to democracy expansion, whether it's relation to lowering the cost of living, whether it's relation to uniting the country across ethnic and regional divides, for example, many, many good things, or repealing anti-democratic laws or repressive laws, for example. That's what made HH appealing, and the people voted for him. 5 years later, people look at that record and say, this man hasn't lived up to his promises. So when he makes new promises, they sound hollow, they ring hollow, because people are able to look back and say, sir, you haven't lived up to your promises, for example. And as a result, that's why you are seeing all these people going to other opposition leaders, because they feel disappointed. So the problem here is the lack of credibility on the part of the president. It's not that Hamasaka or Simue or other UPND communicators, Cornelius Network, Jabu Kawana, are bad communicators. The idea that all the UPND and President Chilema need are better liars is unconvincing, because what they have is a bad product. You can't sell a bad product. People have lived through the failures of the UPND over the last 5 years, whether it's relation to cost of living, or whether it's relation to police failures in the anti-corruption sector, democracy, and mining, for example. If you tell my grandmother to say the reason why you are going to bed without eating is because Hamasaka, Simue, has not communicated to you in an effective, meaningful way